Welcome, Seeker. We lift the veil on a tale whispered through the Exile myth etched into the soul of humanity. The Garden of Eden. Not as doctrine, not as history, but as symbol, a cipher. Beneath its serene trees and sacred names lie secrets too powerful for the surface. We descend into the hidden currents of meaning, into the occult heart of paradise, lost to awaken truths long buried in shadow. The Garden of Eden. The name itself evokes images of pristine innocence, a primordial paradise where humanity walked in blissful ignorance, hand in hand with the divine. It is often presented as a historical idol, a lost golden age. Yet, within esoteric traditions, from the arcane whispers of Kabbalah to the challenging tenets of Gnosticism and the transformative fires of alchemy, Eden is perceived not merely as a place, but as a profound allegory, a spiritual map, a blueprint of consciousness itself. It is crucial to understand, as we embark on this journey, that the interpretations we explore are drawn from ancient mystic texts, philosophical schools, and occult lore. They are symbolic explorations, designed to provoke thought and inner reflection, rather than assertions of absolute material fact. Our aim is to gaze into the symbolic mirror that Eden holds up to the human condition, to its deepest aspirations, its inherent dualities, and its eternal quest for knowledge, and perhaps for a return to a lost state of grace or the attainment of a higher one. The story, as commonly told, is deceptively simple. A garden, two primordial humans, two potent trees, a cunning serpent, a forbidden fruit, and a tragic expulsion. But within each of these elements, occult thought finds a wealth of meaning, a complex interplay of forces that resonate with the very fabric of existence. Was Eden a state of perfect harmony, or a gilded cage of unknowing? Was the serpent a mere tempter, or a catalyst for an awakening? Was the fall a catastrophic error, or a necessary, albeit painful, step in the evolution of the human spirit? Today, we will delve into these questions, examining the garden not as a lost geographical location, but as a symbol of the primordial self, the uncorrupted soul. We will explore Adam and Eve not just as the first man and woman, but as archetypal representations of cosmic principles, of the masculine and feminine energies that dance through creation. We will gaze upon the two infamous trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and consider what forbidden wisdom, what perilous power they truly offered. Prepare yourself to look beyond the veil, to consider that the Garden of Eden might be a landscape that exists within each of us, a potentiality that is both lost and perpetually sought. As always, I encourage you to listen with an open mind, to question, to research, and to form your own understanding. For in the realm of the esoteric, the most profound truths are often those we uncover within ourselves. Our exploration begins not with the fall, but with the garden itself, the primordial canvas upon which the drama of consciousness was destined to unfold. The concept of a paradise or a golden age is not unique to the Abrahamic traditions. Echoes of such an idyllic beginning can be found in the mythologies of ancient Sumer, Greece, Persia, and beyond. These narratives often depict a time of effortless existence, of direct communion with the divine, and an absence of suffering, toil, or death. From an occult perspective, these universal myths point towards a collective unconscious memory, or an archetypal understanding of a state of unity and wholeness that predates our current experience of separation and duality. Eden, in Hebrew, can be translated as delight or pleasure, suggesting a state of being rather than merely a physical location. Esoteric schools often interpret the garden as a symbol of the soul in its purest, most original state, unburdened by the complexities of ego, unmarred by the trauma of worldly experience, existing in perfect resonance with the Source, or the Godhead. It represents the potential for spiritual perfection inherent within humanity. Consider the layout often described: a walled garden irrigated by a river that splits into 4 headwaters, flowing out to nourish the world. Symbolically, the wall can represent the sacred, protected space of the inner self, a sanctuary from the chaotic external world. The single river, the source of life and nourishment, can be seen as the singular divine emanation, the Ein Sof or limitless light of Kabbalah, which then differentiates into the 4 rivers. These 4 rivers have been variously interpreted as the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 worlds of Kabbalistic cosmology, or even the 4 humors of ancient medicine, symbolizing the foundational structures of both the macrocosm and the microcosm, the universe and the individual. Thus, the garden is not just a fertile patch of land. It is a mandala, a sacred diagram of cosmic order and inner harmony. It is the axis mundi, the world's center, where heaven and earth meet, where the spiritual and material are seamlessly interwoven. To be in Eden is to be in a state of perfect alignment, where the inner world reflects the divine order, and the outer world is a harmonious extension of that inner state. This was a state, tradition tells us, of profound, almost dreamlike consciousness, a consciousness not yet fractured by the burden of self-awareness in the way we now understand it. Having established the garden as a symbolic representation of a primordial state of unity and potential, we now turn our gaze to its first inhabitants, the figures of Adam and Eve. In the esoteric lens, these are not merely the progenitors of the human race in a biological sense, but archetypal forms, personifications of fundamental cosmic principles and the very architecture of human consciousness. The name Adam itself, derived from the Hebrew Adama, meaning earth or ground, immediately connects him to the material realm. He is formed from the dust, a vessel of clay animated by the divine breath. This speaks to humanity's dual nature, rooted in the earth, yet infused with spirit. In Kabbalistic mysticism, Adam is often equated with Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, a macrocosmic being who represents the perfected divine blueprint for humanity, a totality encompassing all souls. This Adam Kadmon is not the individual Adam of Eden, but the archetypal ideal, the divine image reflected in creation. The Adam of the garden, then, can be seen as the initial manifestation of this blueprint, representing the nascent conscious principle, the focused intellect, the active, formative aspect of the psyche. Before the arrival of Eve, Adam exists in a state of solitary contemplation, naming the creatures of the garden, an act which, in many ancient traditions, signifies a degree of dominion and understanding, a conceptual ordering of reality. Yet, the narrative implies an incompleteness, a divine recognition that it is not good for man to be alone. This aloneness can be interpreted not just as a lack of companionship, but as an imbalance, a consciousness yet to be fully awakened to its own internal complexities and its relationship with the deeper currents of life. Then comes Eve, or Chava in Hebrew, meaning life giver or living one. Her creation is one of the most symbolically rich and often misinterpreted passages. Fashioned from Adam's rib, or as some esoteric scholars suggest, from his side or essence, her emergence signifies a fundamental division, a differentiation within the unified Adam. This is not necessarily a subordination, but a necessary polarization, the birthing of duality from unity. From an occult perspective, Eve represents the complementary force to Adam's conscious intellect. She is often associated with intuition, the subconscious mind, the emotional body, the receptive principle, and the deep instinctual connection to the mysteries of nature and the unseen. If Adam represents the ordering mind, Eve embodies the flowing, generative power of life itself, the anima to his animus. Together, they form a whole, a dynamic interplay of conscious and subconscious, intellect and intuition, masculine and feminine energies, not merely in a gendered sense, but as fundamental cosmic polarities that exist within every individual, regardless of physical form. Their state of being naked and unashamed before the fall is profoundly symbolic. This is not merely a statement of primitive simplicity, but an indication of a consciousness unburdened by the ego's self-judgment, fear, and artifice. It speaks of transparency, of an innocent vulnerability where there is no separation between inner being and outer expression, no need for masks or defenses. They existed in a state of unfiltered perception, their senses perhaps more attuned to the subtle energies of the garden, their connection to the divine and to each other unmediated by the analytical, categorizing mind that would later develop. This innocence, however, is a complex concept in esoteric thought. While it denotes purity and harmony, it can also imply a state of unknowing, a lack of developed self-awareness and true volitional agency. It is the innocence of a child, beautiful and pure, but not yet tested by the crucible of experience, not yet forged in the fires of choice and consequence. The garden, in this light, might be seen as a womb, a protected space for nascent consciousness, but a space that, by its very nature, implies an eventual birth, an emergence into a wider, more challenging reality. The harmony of Adam and Eve in this primordial state, therefore, represents the ideal of integrated consciousness, where the intellect and intuition, the active and receptive, are in perfect balance. But it is a passive balance, a gift given, not a state achieved through conscious effort and self-knowledge. The stage was set, the players in place, but the drama of human evolution, the journey towards self-realization, had yet to truly begin. And at the heart of this drama, at the very center of this symbolic garden, stood two trees of immense and perilous significance. At the symbolic heart of Eden, two trees stand distinct, their significance central to the entire esoteric drama, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These are not mere botanical specimens, but potent archetypal symbols, representing divergent paths, fundamental cosmic energies, and the very choices that define the human spiritual journey. Let us first consider the tree of life, Etz Chaim in Hebrew. This tree is a ubiquitous symbol across numerous ancient cultures and mystical traditions, often depicted as an axis mundi, connecting the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. In the context of Eden, it represents eternal life, divine energy, interconnectedness, and the regenerative power of the cosmos. Its fruits, had Adam and Eve partaken of them in their initial state, would have conferred or sustained a form of immortality, a perpetual existence within the harmonious unity of the garden. In Kabbalah, the tree of life is a central diagram, a complex map of divine emanations, the Sephirot, which illustrate the process by which the infinite, unknowable Godhead manifests into creation. Each Sephirah represents a specific divine attribute or energy, and the paths connecting them represent the flow of this divine energy. To eat from this tree, symbolically, is to integrate these divine attributes, to achieve a state of spiritual wholeness and direct communion with the Source. It is the path of unity, of being, rather than knowing in a separative sense. The tree of life is often associated with wisdom, but it is the wisdom of direct experience, of inherent understanding, rather than analytical or conceptual knowledge. Then, standing in provocative contrast, is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Etz Hada'at Tov Wara. This tree is the fulcrum of the Edenic narrative, the source of the forbidden fruit. Its name itself is laden with meaning. It is not simply the tree of knowledge, but specifically the knowledge of good and evil, a duality. This implies a shift from a state of undifferentiated unity to a state of polarized perception, where things are judged, categorized, and experienced as separate and often opposing forces. From an occult perspective, this tree represents the awakening of self-consciousness, the development of the ego, the capacity for analytical thought, moral discernment, and individual will. To partake of its fruit is to step out of the dreamlike, passive innocence of Eden and into the world of experience, choice, and consequence. It is the path of individuation, of becoming a self-aware entity, distinct from the collective and from the divine. The prohibition against eating from this tree is one of the most debated aspects of the story. Was it a divine test of obedience? Or was it a protective measure, a warning that nascent humanity was not yet prepared for the burden and responsibility that such knowledge would confer? Many esoteric traditions lean towards the latter. The knowledge of good and evil, without the corresponding spiritual maturity and integration symbolized by the tree of life, can be a dangerous and fragmenting force. It can lead to judgment, guilt, shame, and a sense of separation from the divine, precisely the consequences described in the narrative. Consider the nature of this knowledge. It is not merely factual information, but an experiential understanding of reality. Before partaking, Adam and Eve existed in a state beyond good and evil, a state of simple being. Afterward, their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked. This knowing was accompanied by shame and fear, the hallmarks of ego consciousness and self-judgment. They began to see themselves as separate, vulnerable, and flawed. The world, once a harmonious extension of themselves, became something to be navigated with caution and apprehension. Some Gnostic interpretations view the tree of knowledge of good and evil in a more positive, or at least necessary, light. For them, the god of Eden who forbade this knowledge was a lesser deity, a demiurge, seeking to keep humanity in a state of ignorant bliss. The serpent, in this Gnostic rereading, becomes a liberator, a messenger of Sophia, urging humanity to awaken to its own divine spark by partaking of the fruit. This awakening, though painful and leading to expulsion from the demiurge's paradise, was a crucial step towards true spiritual gnosis and liberation from material bondage. Alchemy, too, offers its own symbolic interpretation. The two trees can be seen as representing the prima materia in its dual aspects. The tree of life embodies the incorruptible, eternal spirit, while the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents the mutable, experiential world of phenomena of solve et coagula, dissolution and coagulation. The great work of alchemy, in a sense, is to integrate the wisdom of both trees, to unite the spirit with refined matter, to achieve the philosopher's stone, which confers both longevity and profound understanding. The placement of these two trees in the midst of the garden is also significant. They are central, unavoidable. They represent a fundamental choice, a crossroads inherent in the journey of consciousness. Would humanity remain in a state of dependent, blissful unity, nourished by the tree of life? Or would it dare to reach for the tree of knowledge, to embrace self-awareness, duality, and the perilous path of individuation? with all its attendant risks and rewards. The narrative, of course, tells us which path was chosen, or perhaps which path was destined to be taken. No figure in the Garden of Eden is more shrouded in mystery, controversy, and diverse interpretation than the serpent. Described in the Genesis account as more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made, this creature becomes the catalyst for the pivotal event of the narrative, the partaking of the forbidden fruit. But who or what does the serpent truly represent in the occult symbolism of Eden? Is it a simple embodiment of evil, a mere tempter? Or is its role far more complex, perhaps even necessary? In mainstream exegesis, the serpent is almost universally identified with Satan, the adversary, the principle of evil. This interpretation, however, is largely a later theological development, particularly solidified by Christian tradition. The original Hebrew text does not explicitly make this connection. The word used is nakash, which can mean serpent, but also carries connotations of divination, whispering, and shining. This linguistic nuance opens the door to a wider range of esoteric interpretations. Many occult traditions, particularly those influenced by Gnosticism, offer a radically different perspective. Here, the serpent is often viewed not as a corruptor, but as a liberator, an illuminator. The Gnostics saw the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, as a lesser, flawed creator deity, the demiurge, who sought to keep humanity in a state of ignorant servitude, trapped within the material paradise of Eden. In this context, the serpent becomes a messenger of the true, higher God, or of Sophia, sent to awaken Adam and Eve to their own inherent divinity and the possibility of spiritual gnosis. The serpent's words to Eve are crucial. "You will not certainly die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." From a Gnostic viewpoint, this is not a lie, but a profound truth. The death they would experience was not physical annihilation, but the death of their innocent, unquestioning state, the death of their confinement within the demiurge's limited paradise. Their eyes were indeed opened, and they did begin to understand duality, a characteristic often associated with divine consciousness in its capacity for discernment. The serpent has long been a symbol of wisdom, healing, and esoteric knowledge in many ancient cultures. Consider the caduceus of Hermes, a staff entwined by two serpents, symbolizing healing and commerce. The uraeus, the rearing cobra on the headdresses of Egyptian pharaohs, represented sovereignty and divine authority. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, is a powerful symbol of eternity, cyclicality, and the alchemical process of transformation. These positive or neutral associations suggest that the Serpent of Eden might carry a deeper, more ambivalent meaning than simple malevolence. In Kundalini, yoga, and tantric traditions, the coiled serpent lies dormant at the base of the spine. When awakened, this potent spiritual energy ascends through the chakras, leading to enlightenment and union with the divine. This symbolism of a rising, transformative serpent energy offers another lens through which to view the Edenic serpent, perhaps as a representation of this latent spiritual power, the instigator of an inner awakening. Even within more orthodox mystical traditions like Kabbalah, the serpent can be seen in a complex light. While often associated with the other side, or the forces of imbalance, it is also acknowledged as a powerful force that, when understood and integrated, can lead to profound spiritual growth. The temptation it offers is a test, a necessary challenge that forces consciousness to evolve. Without the serpent's intervention, Adam and Eve might have remained in a state of perpetual, passive bliss, never actualizing their full potential as conscious, volitional beings. The serpent's choice to approach Eve first is also symbolically significant. As we discussed, Eve represents the intuitive, receptive principle, perhaps more attuned to the subtle whispers of the subconscious or the hidden currents of wisdom. Or, from a more psychological perspective, she might represent the part of the psyche more open to questioning, more curious about the unknown, less bound by established rules. The craftiness or subtlety of the serpent can be interpreted as the insidious nature of dawning self-awareness, the quiet internal voice that begins to question, to doubt, to desire more than what is given. It is the seductive allure of the unknown, the promise of expanded consciousness. This is not necessarily an external entity, but could also be understood as an internal impulse, a burgeoning aspect of Adam and Eve's own evolving psyches. Ultimately, the role of the serpent in the occult symbolism of Eden is far from monolithic. It is a profoundly ambivalent figure, a mirror reflecting our own deepest questions about knowledge, obedience, rebellion, and the very nature of good and evil. Was it the bringer of sin and suffering, or the catalyst for a painful but necessary evolution towards self-realization and a more complex understanding of existence? The answer, perhaps, lies not in choosing one interpretation over the other, but in recognizing the profound truth that profound change often arises from a confrontation with that which challenges our most cherished comforts and assumptions. The serpent forced a choice, and that choice, laden with consequence, set humanity upon a new and irreversible path. The serpent has spoken, the seed of doubt has been sown, and Eve, then Adam, make the fateful decision to partake of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This act, so simple in its physical execution, is one of the most symbolically charged moments in Western mythology, representing what is commonly known as the fall of man. But what does this fall truly signify from an esoteric perspective? And what was the nature of the transformation brought about by this forbidden taste? The fruit itself is rarely specified in the original texts, though popular imagination has cemented it as an apple. This association likely arose from a Latin pun. Malum can mean both evil and apple. However, esoteric traditions look beyond the literal fruit to its symbolic essence. The fruit represents the acquisition of a specific kind of knowledge, the experiential understanding of duality, of good and evil, pleasure and pain, self and other. It is the catalyst that shatters the undifferentiated unity of the Edenic state. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit, the text says, "The eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." This opening of the eyes is paramount. It signifies a shift in consciousness, an awakening to a new mode of perception. Before, they existed in a state of natural, unmediated being. Now, they see themselves and each other through the lens of self-awareness. And with this awareness comes the immediate experience of shame and vulnerability. Their nakedness, once a symbol of innocence and transparency, now becomes a source of discomfort. This is the birth of the ego, the sense of a separate self that feels exposed and judged, both by an external divine presence and, perhaps more significantly, by its own nascent internal critic. The sewing of fig leaves is the first act of artifice, the first attempt to hide, to cover, to create a persona, a barrier between the true self and the perceived judgment of the world. This is the genesis of the psychological shadow, the aspects of ourselves we deem unacceptable and attempt to conceal. The fall, therefore, can be interpreted not as a fall from a literal geographical paradise into a cursed world, but as a fall from a state of unconscious unity into a state of conscious separation. It is a descent into the complexities of the material world, experienced now through the filter of a newly awakened ego. This is not necessarily a sin in the moralistic sense of an evil deed, but rather a missing of the mark, an inevitable consequence of the pursuit of a certain kind of knowledge before achieving the spiritual maturity to integrate it harmoniously. The knowledge gained was not inherently evil, but it was premature or unbalanced. Without the established connection to the tree of life, the source of spiritual integration and divine wisdom, the knowledge of good and evil becomes a source of conflict, anxiety, and alienation. Humanity gained the capacity for discernment, for judgment, but lost its innate sense of belonging, its effortless communion with the divine and with nature. The subsequent divine confrontation is also rich with symbolism. God walks in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and Eve hide. This act of hiding signifies their newfound sense of guilt and separation. Their dialogue with God reveals their attempts to deflect blame. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. This is the human ego in its infancy, struggling with responsibility, seeking to externalize its own internal state. The curses that follow are often seen as punishments, but from an esoteric viewpoint, they can also be interpreted as descriptions of the natural consequences of this new state of consciousness. The inherent conditions of life lived in duality and separation from the immediate divine presence. For Eve, the pain of childbirth and subordination to her husband can symbolize the burdens and complexities of embodied existence in the material world, the travails of the emotional and generative principle now operating under the constraints of a more fractured reality. For Adam, the toil of cultivating the cursed ground, of laboring for sustenance, can represent the struggle of the conscious intellect to impose order on a world that now seems resistant, no longer a harmoniously yielding paradise. It is the burden of work in a world perceived through separation. The serpent, too, is cursed to crawl on its belly and eat dust, and enmity is placed between it and humanity. Symbolically, this can represent the subjugation of primal wisdom or instinct to the newly dominant rational ego, and the ongoing internal conflict between our instinctual nature and our conscious, moralistic selves. The dust it eats could signify a confinement to the purely material, a loss of its former, perhaps more elevated, connection to spiritual insight. Crucially, the fall also initiates the experience of mortality in a new way. While death might have been an abstract concept or a natural transition within the cyclical life of Eden, the knowledge gained from the tree of good and evil introduces the fear of death, the existential dread that comes with individuated self-awareness, and the perception of finitude. This fear becomes a powerful motivator, shaping human endeavor, belief systems, and the relentless quest for meaning. In essence, the fall described in Eden is the mythic depiction of humanity's entry into self-conscious existence, with all its attendant glories and sorrows. It is the price of knowledge, the burden of free will, and the beginning of a long, arduous journey of soul-making, a journey away from unconscious unity towards a future, hoped-for conscious reunion, but one achieved through experience, trial, and the integration of the very dualities that were born from that first taste of forbidden knowledge. The taste of forbidden knowledge has irrevocably altered the state of Adam and Eve. Their eyes are opened, shame has entered their hearts, and the harmonious dialogue with the divine has been fractured by fear and blame. The narrative then moves to its poignant climax, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. This act, often viewed as a final, sorrowful punishment, is, from an esoteric perspective, laden with profound symbolism regarding humanity's ongoing spiritual quest. The Lord God says, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever." This statement is pivotal. It acknowledges the transformative power of the knowledge gained. Humanity has indeed touched upon a divine attribute, the capacity for discernment. However, this knowledge, uncoupled from the integrative, life-sustaining energy of the tree of life, would lead to a problematic immortality, an eternity lived in a state of fractured consciousness, perpetual conflict, and spiritual separation. The expulsion, therefore, can be seen not merely as a punitive act, but as a necessary, albeit painful, divine intervention. It is a quarantine, preventing a further, more disastrous imbalance. Humanity, now self-aware and possessing the knowledge of duality, must embark on a different path to wisdom and true integrated immortality, a path that lies outside the gates of the passively received paradise. The Lord God then banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. These images are iconic and deeply symbolic. The east, in many traditions, is the direction of sunrise, of new beginnings, but also, in this context, the direction from which one is exiled, looking back towards a lost dawn. The cherubim, powerful, angelic beings, are not merely guards, but also represent divine presence and sacred law. Their placement signifies that the way back to the effortless, unconscious unity of Eden and direct access to the tree of life in its original state is now sealed. The flaming sword flashing back and forth is a particularly potent symbol. Fire represents purification, transformation, and also danger. The sword signifies discernment, division, and the power of the intellect. Together, they can represent the formidable spiritual and intellectual challenges that now guard the path to profound, integrated wisdom. It suggests that any return to the state symbolized by the tree of life cannot be a simple regression to innocence, but must be an evolution, a journey through the crucible of experience, purified by the fire of trials, and guided by a well-honed, discerning intellect that has integrated the lessons of duality. This expulsion marks the true beginning of the human story as we know it, a story of striving, learning, suffering, and seeking. Eden becomes a lost ideal, a memory, a yearning encoded deep within the human psyche. The ground that Adam must now till the world outside the garden is often interpreted as the challenging realm of material existence, the plane of manifestation where spirit must learn to work with and through matter. It is the school of hard knocks, where lessons are learned through effort and consequence. From an occult perspective, the journey of humanity after the expulsion is the great work itself. It is the alchemical process of transforming the lead of our fallen or separated consciousness into the gold of spiritual enlightenment and reintegration. The goal is not to literally find a lost geographical garden, but to rediscover and reconstruct the Edenic state within oneself, and ultimately to re-establish a conscious, mature connection with the divine, not as an innocent child, but as an awakened, individuated co-creator. The path to the tree of life is not destroyed, but guarded. This implies that access is still possible, but requires a different approach, a transformation of consciousness. Mystical traditions across cultures offer various maps and methods for this journey: meditation, ritual, ethical living, the pursuit of gnosis, the path of devotion, the development of compassion and wisdom. All these, aim to heal the fractures of the fallen state, to integrate the conscious and unconscious, the masculine and feminine, the human and divine, within the individual soul. The memory of Eden, then, serves as both a source of longing and a potent motivator. It is the archetypal lost home that fuels our spiritual aspirations. The occult symbolism suggests that this home is not a place to be found externally, but a state of being to be cultivated internally. The flaming sword of the cherubim may also symbolize the purified and awakened spiritual will, the focused intention required to transcend the illusions of the ego and the distractions of the material world, and to once again approach the life-giving source. The expulsion, therefore, while seemingly tragic, is also the beginning of humanity's heroic journey. The quest for self-knowledge, for meaning, and for a conscious, hard-won reunification with the sacred. It is a narrative that speaks to the core of the human condition, born into a world of bewildering complexity, forever yearning for a lost harmony, yet endowed with the capacity to seek, to learn, and ultimately to transform ourselves and our understanding of reality. And so, we find ourselves standing outside the sealed gates of a paradise mythically lost, yet carrying within us the indelible imprint of its memory. The Garden of Eden, as explored through the esoteric lens, is far more than an ancient tale. It is a profound allegory for the human condition, a symbolic map of consciousness. We've journeyed through its symbolic landscape. Eden as the primordial self, Adam and Eve as archetypes of our inner duality, the two trees representing paths of being and knowing, the enigmatic serpent, a catalyst for change, the forbidden fruit, initiating our experience of duality and the fall into self-aware, egoic existence. The expulsion, guarded by cherubim and the flaming sword, marked not an end, but the beginning of humanity's arduous yet purposeful journey outside passive innocence. From this perspective, Eden is not a place irretrievably lost, but a symbolic state that continues to resonate within each of us. The yearning for Eden is the soul's deep longing for wholeness, for meaning, and for a conscious reconnection with the sacred. Occult traditions, in their myriad forms, offer paths to navigate the wilderness of experience, aiming to restore this inner harmony, to cultivate the garden within. The symbolism of Eden teaches that life is a quest to balance the sharp clarity of knowledge with the profound warmth of wisdom and unity. It suggests that true spiritual growth often blossoms from confronting our own shadows and daring to embrace the complexities of our nature. Perhaps the most potent insight is this: the blueprint of Eden, its essence, was never truly external. The tree of life still pulses with potential at the core of our being, and the tree of knowledge, though its first taste brought exile, offers the tools for discernment that can, with wisdom, illuminate our path. The enduring power of such myths lies not in literal belief, but in their capacity to awaken deeper understanding. The Garden of Eden, then, is a living symbol of our ongoing dialogue with the mystery of existence. Though the gates of that first garden closed, the journey to rediscover and cultivate that sacred space within ourselves continues with every breath, every conscious choice. Thank you for watching. As we explored the occult symbolism of the Garden of Eden, may your journey continue toward greater light, deeper understanding, and a sacred reunion with the garden within.